Um, so my name is Arthur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Reactiv. What we do is that we help patients recover from injuries by making physical and occupational therapy easier and more engaging with augmented reality experiences that you can play on any mobile phones. So today I want to first maybe describe what we're doing to give you a little bit of context. And then I'll dig into a few topics that I think might be interesting. The first one is what's been our approach to develop the games that we create for physical therapy. Then after that, Siddharth will be speaking about mobile augmented reality in particular, and how this technology that's a little bit underappreciated is actually a real game changer in digital health. And then finally, I'll speak about the broader context that Reactiv fits in and the transformation that we see in musculoskeletal care more specifically. So our co-founding team is Siddharth and I. We're both, very techie. I have co-founded 3 startups in the past 7 years. One was in 3D printing, one was in mobile messaging, and now Reactiv in digital health. And before that, I was a consultant for Roland Berger. And Siddharth, maybe introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Siddharth. As Arthur mentioned, I'm a co-founder at Reactiv as well as the COO. I actually graduated from Brown in 2015. And since then, I've been working in the virtual and augmented reality industry at 2 what you might now call metaverse companies. The first being Oblix and the second Garu. And I joined the founding team at Reactiv last year to work on improving musculoskeletal care.
So yeah, as you can see, we're very tech focused, and we also have a very strong engineering team of a few engineers working with us. And we also recently added our first kind of pure medical hire in Hannah, who's an occupational therapist, and is really helping us on the sort of medical side as well. We're still a very early stage startup, but hopefully we'll be growing really fast in the next few months. As I mentioned, we're very tech focused, so we had to bring in quite early on an advisory board that's focused on the medical side of things. And we have a very, very strong set of advisors. Noah is the former chief game designer at Google and has been involved in games for health for the past decade. Really, really great to have him on, especially in terms of game design. Then we have 2 surgeons, Dr. Mefta and Dr. Kohler, who are helping us with really understanding how we can help patients on the medical side. And then Uzair, he's got more of the payer view because he worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield, at CVS, and now he's at Cardinal. And finally, we have Crystal, who's an occupational therapist and has also been really helping us more on the kind of day-to-day clinical impact of what we're doing, giving our tools to actual patients for the past year. I started Reactiv about 1.5 years ago because I had myself 3 knee surgeries in my 20s, 3 ACL reconstructions. And so I had to do accumulated amount of about 2 years of therapy. And I think to a large extent, I did not do enough therapy. And so I broke my right knee ACL twice, and probably the second time because I didn't strengthen enough. I didn't do enough rehab. And I always thought that was because the experience of therapy is just very boring, very repetitive, very difficult to adhere to. And I'm really not the only one to think that. It's hard to estimate how much people do their rehab because there was, until the digital world, no real way to track how much people do their rehab. But estimates are, that less than 30% of people actually do their rehab. And that's probably even quite optimistic. And that leads to slower or incomplete recovery, more chances of injuring yourself again down the line. And it also costs a lot of money to the healthcare system and to employers and to self-insured employers. So what we set out to do is create a clinic that would make rehab more engaging, more fun, and easier to access as well. So we have a mobile application that combines the more kind of traditional features of telehealth, like video call, chat, with the more innovative part, which are the activities that you can do in the app that use augmented reality to make you want to come back to your phone to continue your rehab. And then finally, there's, as I was mentioning, that there's very little data on rehab. I think one of the big sort of positive thing that's linked to having a mobile app is that we're starting to get a lot of data on patient adherence, on patient performance. And I think that's very valuable for the doctors and for the patients to be able to finally understand not only how well they're doing, but also adjust the plan of care based on the data that you're getting. In terms of the business model that we have, we're still early stage, so we're kind of still iterating on that. But for now, really, we've been getting referrals from providers, mainly. So, you know, surgeons, rheumatologists, doctors. And then legally, we're kind of a virtual clinic, and we're providing, you know, occupational therapy. And in terms of payment, right now we're more looking at getting direct contracts with payers, so insurance, especially commercial plans. But there are also CPT codes that are coming in for remote therapy in 2022 that are quite interesting for us and could open some very interesting models, I would say. All right, so that's a little bit of a background on Reactiv. The main innovation that we have is really the AR games that that transform an exercise into a fun activity. So how it works is that you use your phone. We use the phone camera to track your hand. So here is, let's imagine you have like a wrist fracture and you have to do these motions, so flexion, extension, radial, and ulnar deviation. And you have to do those motions over and over again to regain range of motion. What we do is we track those motions and match them with a game, in this case, Candy Crush, or a variation of Candy Crush. And you're moving the candies up, down, left, and right using those motions. And if you've ever played Candy Crush, you know it's very addictive. And so we're really kind of free riding the built-in addictiveness of this kind of game, whether it's Candy Crush, Tetris, bubble shooters, a lot of mobile games that have proven that they're very addictive, and we're just kind of rewiring the controls to the therapy motions. So the difficulty with game design is that it's very hard to make addictive games. We're seeing this even with kind of basing ourselves on a game that we know is addictive, whether it's Candy Crush, Tetris, and so on. Just changing a small aspect, which is the controls, is already a big deviation from the original design. And that's the bulk of the work, is to keep the user experience great despite those adjustments that we do, so that people kind of keep coming back. And that's very, very difficult. And really what we're focusing on the design side, and I would say that's probably our biggest challenge on the product end of what we're doing, is to make sure people come back to the games. There's countless of healthcare companies that think they can gamify, and they just put a few badges and a few stars and think that people are going to come back to collect those, but it doesn't pan out. And even for us, it's not that straightforward, but like at least we're really, you know, putting a lot of our resources and effort into making that happen. And the other thing is that we are involving providers and doctors, therapists really early on in the process. We didn't go out and build whatever we wanted. We really kind of asked what are the motions that are most common in therapy, that are going to be most valuable to have a lot of reps for a user, what's maybe more versatile across a wide range of conditions, and working, iterating with the doctors very frequently. So we send them a first prototype that's hardly playable, and they're telling us, you know, what to adjust, and we kind of do that ping pong back and forth very effectively, I would say. Once we have, and I think now we're at a stage where we have a few games. We have now 3 games in the app that are covering a, you know, fairly broad range of motions for hand therapy, which was our first kind of focus. Now we're able to go to our potential customers, which are the payers, and start working with them on distributing it to the relevant patient population. In terms of the kind of doctors that we've worked with, it's very, so I said there's a lot of them, but it's also been quite broad in terms of the specialties and conditions that are covered, which is something that we may narrow down going forward, but we started kind of not really knowing which patient population would benefit the most from what we do. So we've talked to surgeons, neurologists, rheumatologists, pain doctors, and so on, and a lot of different therapists as well, to build the first few versions. And now we're continuing that discussion, but now to really narrow down, okay, who is this best for? How do we distribute it in the most effective manner? And building those relationships takes time. And we started off, as you know, especially with our advisory board, and you know, working with institutions like the Center for Digital Health, really trying to like get those relationships going quite early on, because these people are very busy. And then the way it works, kind of on a case study here, is that we, so let's say here it's for fine motor skills. Okay, so for people that need to regain the sort of pick and place motion of taking something and then moving it somewhere else. The way that it's done in clinic right now is with peg boards. So you have to pick up those pegs that you see on the photo and then kind of pick and place them on the board, which is not super exciting, but is very valuable in terms of regaining those fine motor skills. And then we go out and we think about what games would match these motions most, you know, in the best way. And what we thought was a kind of a version of Tetris that is without the time pressure. So the pieces are not falling down, because that would be kind of too stressful. You just have to kind of pick and place the puzzle pieces on the board. And as you can see, we are doing basically the same motion, but it's a lot more fun because you have to make those lines to score points and so on. So the games are, you know, an aspect of the self-serving part of our app. So you can go back to the app and kind of keep playing until you've regained range of motion, until you've built strength. But we do have a therapist that is engaging with the patient on a weekly, bi-weekly, or even just monthly basis, depending on the condition, depending on the needs. We're trying to restrict that part and really put more emphasis on the self-serve part of the care. But what's really good is that the therapist now is not just doing a Zoom call with the patient, which was the case during the pandemic, for example. Is very, basic care. Now what we can do is we can have the Zoom call, but overlay those exercises on the Zoom call so that somebody, so the patient can actually play in front of a therapist, but remotely, kind of mimicking what would happen in clinic in that sense, but in a much more convenient way. All right, I'll hand it over to Siddharth about mobile AR.
Hi again, everyone. So today, what I wanted to talk about is why we think mobile AR is a breakthrough technology for digital health. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the past decade, we've seen tremendous tailwinds behind the smartphone, mobile gaming, and augmented reality. So as you can see on the left side here, since the late 2000s, with the advent of the smartphone and the launch of app stores, mobile gaming has exploded. So it's eclipsed the market for console gaming, PC gaming, handheld gaming devices, and arcade gaming combined. So when we talk about mobile AR, we're referring to our augmented reality experiences that are delivered through your smartphone rather than a head-worn display. So you can see in this center chart how quickly mobile AR has taken off. So this has been driven by those tailwinds in the smartphone ecosystem, as well as the ubiquity of experiences like Snapchat and Instagram filters, which I'm sure you've all seen, and the proliferation of tools for game developers like Unity, which we use and makes it really easy, a tool that makes it really easy to create these mobile augmented reality experiences. Today, there are nearly 1 billion active users of mobile AR experiences globally. And the expectation is that that number will continue to increase in the coming years as more people have access to smartphones that are capable of mobile augmented reality. So in addition to the growth of this mobile augmented reality ecosystem, during the last year and a half of the COVID pandemic, we've seen, as you all know, unprecedented demand for digital health solutions, which has led to things like the creation of new standards for what are called application programming interfaces, or APIs, which allow developers like us to securely connect our application to electronic medical record systems and provide access to other features that enable virtual clinics like ours. So as you can see on the right side, patients also prefer using their smartphone for telehealth experiences rather than using a laptop or tablet. So this really, has cemented our view that the smartphone is the right platform for our experience. If you could go to the next slide, please, Arthur. Thank you. So here you can see a video of our hand tracking solution from just 8 months ago. As you can see, the tracking was good, but it was not great. It's slow to respond to the hand movements. That's not just the video playing slowly, especially on older devices, and it didn't work well in variable lighting conditions. This solution also only worked on the rear camera, so it was an awkward experience for our patients. They had to, kind of hold the device in one hand and then play the game with the other hand, and that wasn't great. So what you can see on the other side today, just 8 months later, the hand tracking implementation is much better. So you'll see that it follows the movements of the hand very closely. It works well, even in poor lighting conditions. And it now uses the selfie camera. So it allows the patient to just put the phone down, maybe prop it up with their laptop or something else, or a mug, and just have the camera and the display face him or her. So you can see here on this slide, the difference between these two videos shows how quickly computer vision is evolving. So this is driven by advances in AI and machine learning, which are the same technologies that are underpinning augmented reality. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So looking at some of the previous efforts to digitize physical rehabilitation, some of them were able to enable gamification, and some were able to enable accessibility, but not both. And so on the bottom right quadrant here, you can see experiences that use mobile phones and tablets. They're affordable, they're easy to use because these are devices that patients already have and know how to use. But the developers of these experiences have really struggled to make these experiences engaging for patients. And so as Arthur mentioned in the early part of the presentation, the result is low levels of compliance with the physical therapy program, which is not much of an improvement over the existing paradigm. On the upper left quadrant, these developers have gone all in on virtual reality. So this has led to really fun and immersive experiences for users, but it requires hardware that is very costly and very difficult to set up. In the bottom left quadrant, there are developers of experiences that rely on custom hardware like an Xbox Kinect or similar device, which is also not cost effective and it's not easy to set up. And it doesn't offer the benefits of the experience of a virtual reality headset. And so we find ourselves in the upper right quadrant with mobile AR, with a solution that doesn't require any extra hardware beyond your smartphone. And it still offers an experience that's as engaging as the high-end virtual reality experiences. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know firsthand the benefits of using smartphones to deliver our product rather than third-party hardware, because we actually initially built our experience for the Oculus Quest, which is a virtual reality headset. And what we found was that the operating cost per patient was about $150 per month to purchase, distribute, and maintain the VR hardware, as compared to less than $1 per month to distribute a mobile app to a device that you already own. And on top of that, because of the logistical challenges of transporting VR headsets, even just here in the New York area, let alone nationally or globally, patients had to wait days to get started with the rehab experience, which is suboptimal. And of course, with a mobile app, you just download it and you can actually onboard into our experience in less than a minute today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So it's still early days for Reactiv, but we've already seen this choice of mobile AR pay off in terms of early results from patients. So here you can see the activity over the course of 3 months for a wrist fracture patient of ours named Kiran. And so the data that you see here is the number of motions of wrist extensions, flexions, and ulnar and radial deviations. So these are the range of motion exercises that Arthur mentioned earlier that Kiran was prescribed by her physical therapist to do at home each day. Now, as Arthur mentioned, this data is data that we're collecting that would not have typically been collected at all in a traditional physical therapy setting. So in a traditional setting, your therapist might tell you to do a certain number of reps of an exercise at home, but you may or may not do them. And your therapist isn't going to ask you to report the exact number of reps you're doing each day. But in our case, all of this data is collected passively as the user plays our games. And it's made available to both the patient and the therapist for analysis. So as you can see here, Kiran, in these 3 months, had completed over 20,000 reps. So she's really enjoying the games. And some days she's done over 700 motions in just a single day. And what we've heard from her and from other patients is that they're not even, because they're playing games, they're not even really thinking about the fact that they're actually doing these range of motion exercises. And what we've heard from the therapists and the physicians whom we work with and to whom we've shown this data is that these levels of compliance are really remarkable. And really, we believe that this is because of this really tight intertwining of the mobile AR gaming experience with the rehabilitation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the other thing that we found that's really interesting is that the data that we collect, or the information that we collect on patient activity, we can actually use it to improve the plan of care for the patient. So in the upper chart, you can see my activity, or the activity of an unimpaired user. And the distribution of my motions across wrist extensions, flexions, ulnar and radial deviations is roughly even, which is what you would expect over enough levels, in this case, over 2,000 motions. Given that the candies are, in the game that Arthur showed, the Candy Crush-like game, the candies are randomly distributed in the game board. So there's no kind of natural sort of inclination to move in one direction over another across enough levels. But in the lower chart, you can see the same patient, Kiran's activity, and you can see that she's doing a lot of ulnar deviations and a lot of flexions, but not many extensions and almost no radial deviations. And so our assumption is that these are the most difficult motions for Karen to do. They're the most uncomfortable for her, and that's why she's avoiding them. So again, this is, if you were doing these exercises at home on your own, this data would, probably never be captured and never make its way to the therapist. But in our case, the therapist gets access to this data in real time and can actually, on the next video call or even in the chat, can intervene and try and understand what's going wrong, or even to correct Kieran's activity, or adjust the plan of care in some other way. But perhaps even more interestingly than that, we can actually do this automatically using software. So we can actually dynamically adjust the game experience to correct Kieran's activity. So for example, we could disable motions that she's very comfortable doing to actually force her to do motions that she's less comfortable doing. Or we could, perhaps a little bit more softly, incentivize motions using game mechanics like, points or rewards to encourage a patient, especially a patient who's really enjoying the games and is competitive, to try and earn, additional points or rewards by doing those motions that are more difficult. So what we found, just in some early, tests with patients is that we're able to really leverage this data to sort of actively improve and tailor the patient's plan of care. Back to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Siddharth. So, we've been doing all of this really starting from the point of view of the patient, because I was a patient. I started with trauma patients at first because that was my own experience and so on. But as we grow and as we start getting real life patients in our app that have a wide range of conditions, of demographics, backgrounds, and so on, we obviously started looking at what's the broader picture here, especially in the light of the pandemic, which accelerated a lot of the digital health transformation in musculoskeletal care. And I want to talk a little bit more about this because while we're still early, I think we're starting to see some very interesting form a lot of very interesting hypotheses around what the future of musculoskeletal care will be. So first of all, one thing that happens once you start putting your clinic out there, which is quite recent for us, but is that you therapists and doctors, they were very, very helpful when it was about designing and advising us on how to do things. When it starts being, okay, now refer patients to us, we see that people have different perceptions of digital therapy, basically. Now it's not a theoretical product anymore. It is, how does that product impact my business? So is it a threat of automation, or is it a tool to improve my profession? And, it's tricky because occupational therapy, physical therapy, they are industries that are changing dramatically at the moment. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But, I think there will be a big part for humans to play in the process, but it might not be perceived that way with our clinic at the moment. The thing is, we automate a lot of the processes, and we are making it more self-care versus, in-person care. But we also make it a lot easier for patients to access therapy and to keep getting therapy, basically, forever. So I don't think that therapists that therapists will have less to do, but it might be that their role will be changing, and they'll be maybe dealing more with prevention, education, maintenance, for example, and a bit less about telling you how to do a movement that you could easily find on YouTube in a quick search. So that transformation is always difficult for any industry, but in our case, it's one that needs to happen. And the other thing is, physical rehabilitation is under massive transformation, but that's not just because of COVID. I think for a lot of other healthcare segments, COVID was the game changer. But for physical rehabilitation, I think that pressure has been on for a while because reimbursement rates have been decreasing and are still decreasing at the moment. So it's been an industry that's been pushed to optimize for utilization, not necessarily quality of care. It's still overwhelmingly a fee-for-service industry, and it's been, you know, when you try to bring in technology, it's not easy because margins are already very, very low there. And so you've got the traditional way of doing therapy, and on the other side you have digitally native players like Hinge Health, Kaya, Sword Health, which are players that we've seen in the sort of the competitive analysis earlier on. And those are becoming really big. They've raised a lot of money. They're doing virtual PT in a fairly effective way. And if you're looking at their offering, they say they provide musculoskeletal care, not physical therapy or occupational therapy. I think that semantic change reflects the fact that therapy is changing away from, you know, the rigid mold that it was, and that it's going to be more of a flexible type of care, more about prevention, long-term care, where patients might never end in a discharge, you know. And that's enabled by automation, telehealth, and ease of access, as we've seen. And I think if we think about Reactiv's vision for the future of musculoskeletal care, is that you will be playing games, you will be playing interactive experiences on an ongoing basis. And you kind of forget that it's about rehab, or that it's prevention, or that I'm in a clinic. It's just an activity that you do, and that makes you better in the long run. I'm going to wrap this up with kind of giving you some thoughts about what I think the future of musculoskeletal care is. But we're going to be humble here because I don't think we're know for sure any of these points. We're just kind of starting to have some hypotheses emerge. But as I mentioned, we're starting to see some real life patients in our app, and therefore we're seeing some of the, but we're kind of starting to see some of the future of physical therapy and musculoskeletal care. The first point is that we need to build something that is virtual first. I think by rebuilding the care from scratch and being virtual first, we create an experience that is very superior. Now people are expecting, not only in therapy, but just in any sort of healthcare, whatever their condition is, they're going to expect that they have at least the option to have a virtual evaluation, for example. And so that convenience is going to be a big driver in healthcare in general, but one that definitely will happen in musculoskeletal care. The second point is that we may see a specialization of therapy. Right now, when you go to occupational therapy, it's just one place, and the same therapist will be treating you whether you have a stroke, a fracture, or arthritis. And that's like, those are conditions that are widely different. And that doesn't seem like optimal care. That's definitely not what happens upstream in the medical field, where doctors have very narrow specialties. I think that's because the in-person model that was prevalent was that therapists needed volume, right? So they needed to have a very broad scope. Now you have the digital revolution. Now you can treat remotely thousands of patients that have a very specific condition. So we could potentially say we're only treating cerebral palsy, and then we specialize in it, and we still have thousands, tens of thousands of patients. And so I think that's what we might see with digital musculoskeletal care, is that some companies, some therapists start really specializing on specific conditions. The third point, I've kind of alluded to that already, but is that patients don't really think of us as a clinic. We legally are a clinic because that's how you have to operate. but patients I don't think they understand what a virtual clinic is. What they see us as is that we're a service that provides ongoing care remotely. And we might need new words to describe this, because clinics are more like, in their mind, that's the in-person thing. Oh yeah, I go to the clinic, for my therapy. But what does that mean for us? What are we? And I think we still need to figure out how to express who we are. And then finally, because of the remote and automated features that can be built with digital health, the focus might be more on long-term care, prevention, holistic approaches. I think we're seeing this maybe a little bit in mental health. I'm definitely not a specialist, but what I see is that you have a lot of big players now, like Ginger, Happify, Spring Health, so many others, who are much closer to their patients because they're in their pockets. And I think they can kind of like follow them for years and have that more holistic approach, because no matter where the patient is, they're still in contact with that same company or that same therapist. And so it's happening, I think, in the mental health space. I think it's coming to the physical health space as well. Those are just thoughts, but I think these are sort of the early trends that we're seeing with the patients that we have. Thanks for listening. If you would like to reach out to us, you can email us at info@reactivrehab.com, but also curious to hear if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arthur and Sarah. This was a great presentation. And if you could just stop sharing your screen so we can have our Q&A here. So first of all, everyone, I encourage you to put in your comments and questions in the chat here. And it looks like we already have a few. David, if you're still on, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute yourself. If not, I can ask it. I can read off the chat here. All right, so David is asking, in your product discovery, why do you believe physical therapy and occupational therapy hasn't innovated over the years? You mentioned the stat 30% engagement and low engagement or performance data. What is or has been the biggest barrier to innovation? What will change this closed mindset to delivering digital care in rehab?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one that I was maybe kind of idealistically hoping that we would be able to innovate in tandem with the existing system and existing therapists. So at first we were kind of trying to give our tool as an adjunct to therapy. And it's true that as soon as we bring in technology to therapists, at first they're very excited. So I don't think it's like they don't want technology or anything like that. But the whole system is not built for innovation. The first thing is that they charge their time, and that's the only thing they can really charge, unless we're talking about medical devices. And I mean, I'm not going to necessarily get into that, but like the most of the revenue for a therapy clinic is based on utilization. It's like, I need all of my therapists to be 100% of their time seeing patients and billing CPT codes. It's not about testing this, new way of doing or new way of thinking. And so in a world where the reimbursement rates are going down, which is really the case in physical and occupational therapy, there's more and more pressure on increasing utilization and reducing any sort of, if you're thinking about your company as having an R&D line, they've got nearly no R&D line in the kind of the top PT clinics, or even in the mom and pops that are providing physical and occupational therapy services. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons. The other reason, I think, is that this is a very traditional industry. They really have been educated that way of, this is the framework for physical therapy. This is, you're kind of treating somebody holistically. You're kind of trying to hear their problems. Then you don't want to remove any human input, because that's your expertise as a therapist. So it's kind of nearly counterintuitive to a large extent to automate yourself out of your job. And what will change that is it's kind of like if you had tried to give Airbnb to hotels or tried to give Uber to taxi companies, they would never have adopted or distributed it. But that profession will remain in both in the case of hotels or taxis. You still need drivers. Well, so far, you still need drivers. You still need people to care for people, and it'll be the same for us. Like we're building into our product a lot of human interactions because we need expertise, we need support. I think we need the human interaction with the patient, which is kind of fundamental, which is why we moved away from the pure adjunctive therapy. But we have to kind of operate outside of the existing model, I think, or at least that's what we've been pushed to do.
Thank you. I think that's the very unique challenge of digital health kind of being the new frontier of healthcare. We're not suggesting to replace or to kind of supplement. It's really just to complement and kind of provide a way. And as you pointed out, with the musculoskeletal care and kind of around the realm of PT and OT, we're not here to remove the therapist, which is fine, an adjunct to it. Brandon Abbott, do you have a question if you feel comfortable unmuting?
Oh, yeah. I was just, when you were describing the technology cost benefits, I was curious about kind of some of the underlying technology that you were using. Mostly, I didn't know if you were, with the front-facing camera, if you were reliant on, say, like LiDAR cameras or just like the camera itself, because that would influence the cost saving to the individual, because some of cheaper phones may not have certain features or as high quality cameras as others. I wondered if that really influences how well this app and programming works, because I could see that really almost like kind of self-selecting who would be able to actually engage with the technology, and if you have any plans around that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I actually should have addressed this during the talk, but we don't require LiDAR for our experience. So it actually works on any Android or iPhone, any Android phone or iPhone, I would say, roughly from the last 5 years. In fact, you can download it and try it out on both the App Store and the Google Play Store. And actually, one thing that's actually really interesting is as we started giving this out to patients, Arthur had mentioned our distribution through providers. One of those providers who works quite closely with us is sort of based in a lower income area. And so the result that we've been kind of forced to make sure that the product works for those patients who have often older phones, less powerful phones, and so that's something we really emphasized. We kind of went to the other end of the spectrum in terms of making sure that this was accessible on as many devices as possible. And so I think it's doing quite a good job of that today. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a question from Lauren McNeil.
Yes, I was really interested to hear you speak about how you can adjust the games to meet the patient's needs. And I was curious to know how you match the game difficulty to the patient's ability at a given time point in their therapy, and also how you would prevent patients from overexerting themselves given the addictive nature of these games.
So yeah, and also great questions. A lot of this right now is sort of mediated by the therapist who's very involved in sort of overseeing the patient's plan of care. So we have, just kind of simple settings right now, easy, medium, and hard for example, the range of motion difficulty levels. So, a patient who's, let's say, just starting to recover from a wrist fracture would start out in easy, and then the therapist could actually upgrade them to the medium level, which requires sort of a larger motion in order to kind of move that candy, and hard, and so on. Patient can also kind of adjust those settings themselves, but the therapist can always see what setting the patient is on. So that's sort of how we're doing it now. We do also have a virtual goniometer, which actually can measure your range of motion. So we can, probably start to do that a little bit more automatically over time. But, in the early stages, we're taking sort of a very hands-on approach. And then in terms of overexertion, we've built in some mechanisms for that. So after about 15 minutes of playing, you'll get a message that says, you played for 15 minutes. We kind of allow you to keep going, but we just sort of give you a warning. We also have time, the whole thing is sort of timer based. So the assumption is you're supposed to do a certain amount of each activity per day. And then we kind of minimize the tile after you've completed that amount of time. So it's kind of built in that way. But also the therapist is able to monitor all of the patient's activity in real time. So if a patient is doing too much, we also record pain levels. So if you're reporting a high pain level, that will get flagged to the therapist. And so the therapist can kind of see all this in real time and intervene through either the chat or, on the next call or whatever is sort of best. And then of course, over time, we could actually, put a hard stop on your activity and prevent you from continuing to play. And we haven't had a problem with that yet, but yeah, there are of course things like that we could do.
Thank you. David Ting, if you're able to unmute. I'm sorry, David, I believe you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, guys, for a really fun presentation and exciting platform here. Earlier, you mentioned thinking about docking in with Xbox, and I absolutely appreciate your philosophy in terms of kind of health equity. Keep it simple, keep it low cost, make it available to folks. But thinking in terms of high end, do you have a roadmap for integrating other AR, VR solutions like Microsoft HoloLens or Oculus to really add a full augmented reality or VR experience to Reactiv?
Yeah, so we started on VR with the Quest at first, and so we obviously believe in how valuable the VR technology can be because it is more immersive, and I think for some conditions it will be a big upgrade to be able to be hands-free, to have a head-mounted display so you can kind of like move more freely. So we are following this very closely. We also both strongly believe that AR is the next sort of big platform to take off. The question is when. So is it in 2 years, in 3 years, or in 10 years? It's hard to say. And I think we will let the market tell us. If we see a huge adoption, and I'm talking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of headsets in the US, then we will very quickly adapt it. It's the same game engine that we would be using. It's Unity either way. So we know how to build experiences on all of these platforms, and we're not afraid of moving when the time comes.
Okay, thank you. I see a comment from Brian Morley. Would you like to expand on your comments?
Hey everyone, fantastic presentation. The technology is exciting. Yeah, I just made a comment more about the orthopedics industry. So that's kind of my background, is orthopedics and hips and knees and spine, and kind of knowing how surgeons, more progressive surgeons, are focused, outside of the operating room. And I think a tool like this is just a phenomenal way for them to plant the seed early with their patients and get those baselines early and get them to start preparing themselves for the surgery, and then also clearly post-op and recovery. But what a phenomenal tool. And then once again, similar to David's comment about the digital equity of having it in the phone, I think that's phenomenal too. So yeah, it's exciting, and yeah, plenty of opportunities in the orthopedic space, no doubt about it.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, we totally agree. One of our advisors is a hip and knee surgeon, and he always wants us to get to those conditions sooner rather than later. The slight complication with that is that the phone screen is quite small, so in order to track your whole body, you kind of have to take a step back. It's not impossible. There was not the low-hanging fruit, so we didn't start with that. That being said, on the roadmap in the next couple of months, we have a back pain experience that we want to start working on. So we're making our way to kind of going lower on other body parts, for sure.
No, that's great. It's all connected, right? The knees, the hips, the spine, it's all connected. So yeah, and all the industry players are investing heavily into digital and AR, and more than just within the operating room. So yeah, you're in an exciting spot.
Thank you.
We have a question from Hillary. Hillary, would you like to unmute?
Hi, yes, thanks. Thanks, guys. This was a really interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that there's going to be a broader application to what you guys are working on than where you guys are starting now and where I think it can go. One of the things that kind of struck me is the idea of therapy specialization. There are disciplines that are specializing beyond, I'm a therapist that treats, physical therapy, right? So I came from Tier Memorial Hermann, which is a really well-ranked national inpatient hospital, right? And we have physical therapists and occupational therapists who specialize in brain injury or specialize in spinal cord injury. And so people are starting to develop these even deeper specializations, like what was the one? It was a neurological music therapist. And so being able to use that to help with brain recovery. So I think that you're on the right track, that there's definitely room for that innovation. But what I'm thinking is, I could see where you could go back to this augmentation model, that your application can be used to augment that downtime. So you're always going to need specialist therapists, or at least for a very long time, you're going to need specialist therapists to do hands-on stuff for some really complicated things. It's going to take us a long time to do some of these complicated movements, especially for, like, we have a disorders of consciousness patient population where we're taking comatose patients and walking them while they're still in a coma. I think we'll be a long way from being able to do that kind of model, but couldn't your application be used by, say, a patient in the bed or, in their room when they're not getting their direct one-to-one therapy in that inpatient stay, so that the therapist can use their time to do the more complicated stuff that requires the hands-on, or that requires, more than what the application can do at this time? What do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you. This is very, very interesting. And I'd love to learn more about the inpatient side of therapy. It's true that we have been focusing on outpatient therapy because generally that's when people fall off the therapy a lot more. As long as they're, doing inpatient therapy, they're more likely to comply, to do their exercises. And when they're home, especially the therapy is long, that's when we feel we have a bigger impact. That being said, I really like the idea of working with people who are in an inpatient setting and are already specializing because they're in a hospital specialized environment, basically, and therefore we could learn from them in terms of what can we do in the longer term, beyond inpatient therapy. So I think that's number one that I'm really taking away from your comment. Then in terms of working with inpatient therapists or working with patients that are still at the hospital, I think that's something that would work, but I wonder then if it's not about then going for those more high-end solutions like virtual reality. And I'm saying that because I know a lot of competitors that are in virtual reality focus on inpatient therapy because of that, because they know that the hospital is going to be able to afford the headsets, is going to be able to distribute them to the patients more easily, and is going to be able to pay the cost. Whereas our choice of technology was a bit linked to the fact that you're on your own, you're in outpatient therapy, and you need the hardware that you have at home. Yeah, that would be my thought. But yeah, I think our app would benefit them either way.
I think in response to that, I think so hospitals can't afford 120, my old hospital's 135 beds. Hospitals probably can't afford 135 VR headsets and have the internet bandwidth to do all of that. But most patients have a smartphone, and the ones that don't, I can easily get someone an iPad for, you know, what, 150, 200 bucks.
Right.
So that's where I think you could, there is some room, I think, there to think about that, and to think about it as an again, back into that adjunct therapy rather than the one-on-one guided. Really interesting stuff. Thanks for presenting.
Thank you, Hilary.
I would love to get to our last question here, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Tyne, do you have a question?
Oh, you said it right, but Stephen has a question.
Yeah. So hello. My name is Stephen Christian. I'm Tyne's partner, and I really enjoyed the presentation. I am a full stack mobile AR developer, been a developer for about 2 years, and I'm also in medical school. And so a lot of the stuff that you mentioned or that you referenced in terms of the credit that mobile AR does not get really resonates with me, because I feel it, and I'm pretty sure you feel it as well. And so with that, sort of being in the intersection, one of the things that I found because of COVID, going into COVID, right, is that there's a lot of people interested in, you know, AR in general. It's kind of a buzzword, but there's a lot of education in the healthcare space that needs to be sort of understood in terms of like the capabilities of mobile AR.
Yes.
But then also there's a lot of new stuff coming, like, right? Like it feels like every 3 months there's a new update to an SDK or Unity, right? And so,
Yes.
And so when it comes to these sort of these care plans and these long-term, the plans of like planning out long-term for the benefit of people, how do you balance that with all the new, you know, sort of beta versions or updates to new bells and whistles that like you can implement, but also can be kind of buggy, right? Like, how do you sort of play that balance when you're sort of like trying to plan for plan for stuff that like impacts people long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I've worked in VR and AR for a few years. So I totally, I think, resonate with exactly what you're saying. As Arthur, you know, as we've talked about, we worked in VR before we pivoted to mobile AR. And I think VR, just given that it's still, you know, wearing a headset and the hardware is developing rapidly, feels less mature and less evolved than mobile AR, despite the fact that mobile AR is arguably a newer technology. And so I think a lot of our sort of effort has been, or sort of experimenting has been kind of mitigated by the fact that we've been on mobile. You know, even though mobile AR itself is sort of a newer technology, a lot of the kind of underlying technology is sort of existing. So, you know, that's one of the things I think has been sort of on the engineering side, a nice transition going from VR to mobile AR has been to kind of rely on this existing smartphone ecosystem. And that was sort of a big part of our decision there. I think, you know, beyond that, you know, the technologies that we're relying on have been pretty stable in terms of Unity and, you know, everything that we're doing with hand tracking and so on. And that's been sort of a pretty solid foundation of what we've been doing. You know, other than that, the features that we've been kind of developing have recently been more so on the clinical side. So the kind of, you know, augmented reality aspect of what we're doing is not, you know, necessarily, I mean, there's certainly with implementing of hand tracking, which was one of the first things that we did, was really tricky to figure out. And we spent a lot of time on that. But once we kind of implemented that sort of core foundation, we've been able to just kind of build on top of it. And we have this kind of, foundation that we can just kind of keep working with. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Arthur. Yeah.
Well, I'll just add that like we had a couple of months of nightmare with one of our SDK on hand tracking. So it was not rosy at all. It was absolutely, I was kind of tearing my hair out because we were not able to release our prototype. That was about 8 months ago. And yes, this is, we experienced that the kind of immature SDKs that are not ready for production, and you got to move fast to sort that out. Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. I apologize that we're a few minutes over time here, but this was such a robust discussion, and I'm so thankful for Arthur and Sarah doing this great presentation, really engaging. And thank you to our audience members who came with some really thought-provoking questions. So this concludes our seminar series for today. Our next one is scheduled for October 6th with the Naval Submarine Laboratory that talks about naval research. Please feel free to reach out to myself and us at the Center for Digital Health with any questions. Thank you, everyone. Hope it's a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.